Caleb Merritt stood in the middle of the shop floor with grease on his knuckles and a work jacket worn thin at both elbows, and not a single person in that building thought twice about him. They called him the bottom rung, the single dad who showed up and kept quiet and never pushed back, the man Logan handed the worst jobs to without explanation, and Adrian dismissed with a comment in front of whoever happened to be standing nearby. 8 months of it. Routine as the smell of old motor oil, routine as the sound of the compressor cycling on at 6:45 every morning. Nobody wondered what he was thinking. Nobody asked what he had done before. Then a car worth $200 million rolled through the front gate of Voss Automotive on a flatbed, and every mechanic in that building stopped what he was doing and stared, because not one of them had ever seen anything like it, and not one of them had any idea what to do. Not one, except the man in the back corner, still holding a wrench, who looked at the car through the shop window and went completely still. What hides behind the grease-covered hands of the most humiliated mechanic in the shop? The truth is about to shake the entire city to its core. The morning began the way most mornings did at Voss Automotive, with the mechanical groan of the roll-up gate, the sharp hiss of the air compressor waking somewhere in the back, and the particular smell of motor oil that had soaked into the concrete floor so thoroughly over 15 years that it had stopped being a smell and become an atmosphere. Logan Voss arrived first, as he always did, planting himself at the center of the floor with a coffee thermos in one hand and the composure of a man who needed other people to see him standing there. He was broad-shouldered and loud in the way that fills a room without necessarily saying anything meaningful, a quality he had cultivated through years of managing a business that rewarded confidence over precision, and that had served him well enough that he had stopped examining whether the confidence was earned. Voss Automotive had grown from a 2-bay shop to a 12-bay operation on the back of commercial contracts and fleet maintenance accounts, and Logan wore that growth the way some men wear a uniform, as evidence that the world had validated him, and that anyone who questioned him was therefore questioning a verdict already rendered. His crew knew better than to test that narrative before noon. Caleb arrived 6 minutes into the shift, within the acceptable window but not the impressive one, and Logan noted it without saying anything. He did not say anything for the same reason a man with a hammer does not tap a nail that is not yet loose. Not out of generosity, but out of patience for better openings. Instead, he dropped Caleb's work order on the floor in front of his station, a gesture so habitual it had ceased to require conscious thought, and moved on to speak with Adrian at the lift. The order called for a brake job on a delivery van in Bay 4 and a transmission flush on a box truck in Bay 9 that had been sitting since Thursday. It was the kind of work given to the man at the bottom, and Logan had been giving it to Caleb for 8 months with the confidence of someone who had correctly assessed a situation once and saw no reason to revisit the assessment. The work required no diagnosis, no engineering judgment, no particular skill beyond competent procedure. And that, in Logan's taxonomy, was exactly what Caleb was worth. Adrian Cole was the senior mechanic by title and by duration, having held the position for 5 years on the strength of Logan's early faith in his own talent for making himself indispensable to the shop's social order. He was competent at the work and very good at the room, at knowing what to say, when to say it, and who was listening, which is a different skill set from mechanical aptitude and often a more effective one in a closed environment. He watched Caleb bend down for the work order from the floor and offered, at a volume calibrated for the 2 nearest mechanics, that they made shelves for exactly that kind of thing, for people who needed to read something before they got started. The laugh that followed was brief and automatic, the kind that happens because it releases something rather than because the remark itself earned it. Caleb straightened, read the order, and walked to Bay 9 without a word. He worked through the morning efficiently and without conversation, finishing both assignments 40 minutes ahead of Logan's penciled schedule. He identified a worn secondary bearing in the box truck that had not been noted on the intake form, logged it in the service record with the correction, and moved to the afternoon queue without being asked. Logan did not acknowledge it. Adrian was talking near the parts counter about something unrelated, the way men talk when the day has not yet produced anything worth discussing. The shop was loud with pneumatic tools and the low, steady vibration of hydraulic equipment, and Caleb worked inside that noise the way a man works inside weather, not fighting it, not enjoying it, simply present within it. If the other mechanics found him unremarkable, he had made himself that way deliberately. It cost him something each day to maintain it. But he paid the cost because some costs are worth exactly what they buy. 3 years before Voss Automotive, Caleb Merritt had a north-facing office window in Geneva, Switzerland, that looked out over a stone courtyard where finished vehicles were rolled out for final light inspection before delivery. Atelier Celestine was not a car company in the conventional sense. It was a commission house, a team of 32 engineers, designers, and fabricators who built approximately 8 bespoke vehicles per year for clients whose identities were protected by contract and whose names did not appear on any public document associated with the firm. Each vehicle was a single object. Each one was different in its architecture from every other one the shop had produced. Each one was, in the private language of the team, unrepeatable, which was simultaneously a design philosophy and a business model and a source of quiet professional pride. Caleb had joined the firm at 28 as a powertrain integration specialist and risen, over 4 years, to lead engineer, which meant he was the last signature on every technical document before a car left the building, and the first name called when a system refused to behave as expected. The commission that consumed the last 22 months of his time at Atelier Celestine was a vehicle he had privately considered the most complete piece of engineering he had ever been responsible for. The client was a man named Joseph Hartwell, the mayor of a mid-sized American city, a serious collector of rare and significant vehicles, and the kind of father who expressed affection through extraordinary objects. The Aurora X1 was to be a gift for his daughter, Giselle, who had recently completed her graduate work in mechanical engineering and had communicated to her father's representative, with the directness of someone who does not enjoy the performance of wanting things, that she would like something no one else possessed. Caleb had read the brief twice and spent the next 22 months trying to deserve it. He designed the dual-mode hybrid drive architecture, the proprietary thermal management system, and the digital control module he had internally designated the Dynamic Engagement and Performance Manager, the DEP, which governed the interaction between the vehicle's 2 powertrains under high-load conditions and was, in his own assessment, the most technically demanding firmware architecture he had written in his career. He also knew it had a flaw. In the final weeks of the project, during extended edge case simulations that Logan and Adrian would not have known to run and would not have had the tools to interpret, Caleb had found a conflict interrupt in the DEPM firmware, a specific combination of operating conditions under which the traction control override, when triggered at sustained speeds above 180 km per hour in ambient temperatures exceeding 32 degrees Celsius, would cause the hybrid drive failsafe to engage and cut power to the entire system without generating a standard onboard diagnostic error code. The car would simply stop responding, no fault would appear on any accessible channel. The system would go silent with no explanation. He wrote a formal internal report, attached a 47-line firmware patch that corrected the trigger logic, and submitted it with a priority recommendation before the delivery date. The report was read, assigned a low-risk classification given the narrow thermal and velocity envelope required to trigger it, and filed without action. The Aurora X1 was delivered to the Hartwell estate on schedule. Caleb signed the final documentation and drove home. Mia died 12 days after the Aurora X1 was delivered to the Hartwell estate. The diagnosis had come 4 months before that, and she had asked the doctors to hold the information while she found the right way to approach the conversation with Caleb, and she had not found it in time. He learned about the cancer and her death within the same week, separated by 4 days in a hospital room where he held her hand and watched the distance between them collapse and understood, for the first time with his whole body rather than just his mind, that a man can be prepared for almost anything except the actual experience of it. He had spent 22 months building a machine of extraordinary precision and had not been able to do anything at all about the thing that mattered most. He took emergency leave from Atelier Celestine, attended the funeral, and sent a formal resignation 2 days afterward. A single paragraph, no forwarding address, no request for a reference letter, no explanation beyond circumstances requiring his departure. He packed what he and his daughter Bonnie would need, enrolled the 7-year-old in a school 2 blocks from an apartment he rented above a dry cleaner on a quiet street in Ohio, and applied for a job at Voss Automotive with a CV that listed his technical competencies without naming a single employer. Logan had needed someone for the heavy bays and had not looked past the first paragraph. 8 months later, the Navy Canvas notebook in his locker still held the same 7 years of technical notes and annotated schematics from his Geneva years. He had not opened it in front of another person since arriving at Voss. He had not needed to. There had been nothing in this shop that required it. Nothing that came within the same universe as the systems he had spent years learning to read. The simpler version of himself that this life was supposed to be building. But on the morning the Aurora X1 arrived, he felt the weight of the notebook differently. The way a person feels the presence of something they have been deliberately not thinking about, when circumstances abruptly remove the effort that was holding the thought at a distance. The flatbed arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it was not the kind of truck that used their street under normal circumstances. It was the enclosed transport type used for race circuit logistics, climate-controlled, with pneumatic securing systems and a hydraulic descent ramp, and it parked in front of Voss Automotive with the careful precision of a driver who had been told this stop was important. Behind it came a black Escalade and a second black SUV, both with tinted glass, both moving with the smooth purposefulness of vehicles that do not hurry and do not wait. The mechanics in the visible bays slowed and then stopped the way people slow when something interrupts the frequency of the ordinary without yet supplying a category for what it is. Adrian stepped out from the parts corridor and looked. Logan came through his office door, holding a clipboard he then forgot he was holding. The car descended on the hydraulic ramp, and the first thing the shop saw was color. A deep, lightless blue-black, the kind that received light rather than reflected it, a carbon fiber body finished to a depth that made the surface seem not painted but grown, like something that had been coaxed into existence rather than manufactured. There was no visible badge, no maker's emblem, no production plate on the chassis. The proportions were unlike anything that passed through a commercial dealership because they had not been designed for repetition or market compliance. They had been designed for this single object, and every surface expressed that singularity with the quiet authority of something that knows exactly what it is. The shop went briefly and completely silent in the way spaces go silent around things they have no existing category for. Giselle Hartwell stepped from the Escalade without surveying the environment first, the way a person enters a room they have already mapped in their mind. She was 28 years old, dressed without performance, a dark jacket, flat shoes, her hair pulled back with no particular attention to presentation, and she moved with the particular economy of someone who had learned that presence does not require announcement. She checked the address against whatever internal reference she held, confirmed it, and walked to the shop entrance. Behind her, Diana Walsh moved in, practiced parallel, carrying a closed folder and a tablet, with the quiet efficiency of someone whose job was to anticipate the next thing before it became necessary. Logan met them at the door with the expression of a man who had prepared a version of himself that was ready for important clients. Giselle described the vehicle's problem without preamble or social architecture. The Aurora X1 had lost drive power twice under high-performance operating conditions, both incidents occurring at sustained highway speeds in warm ambient temperatures. No standard fault code had appeared on either occasion. 3 specialists at 3 separate high-end service facilities had connected diagnostic systems to the car over the preceding 2 weeks, and none had identified a root cause. On each attempt, the vehicle's internal security protocol had logged a failed diagnostic event and incrementally hardened the system against further unauthorized access. One more failed attempt would lock the vehicle completely, requiring a direct authorization from Atelier Celestine's technical department to reset, a process that required a minimum of 72 hours under the manufacturer's security protocol. She did not have 72 hours. She needed a facility willing to attempt the work today, and she needed a result by the following afternoon. Logan said they could have it done by 3 the next day. He said it with the smooth forward momentum of a man who has learned that the gap between commitment and capability can often be bridged by the time required to cross it. Giselle listened until he finished, gave nothing away in her expression, and instructed Diana to transfer the vehicle into the shop's custody. She would return at 3 in the afternoon for a status update. As she turned toward the exit, she paused. Not dramatically, barely perceptibly, a fraction of a second that would have gone unnoticed in most rooms. As her line of sight crossed the far end of the shop floor, a mechanic in a worn work jacket was standing near the rear bay door, looking through the glass at the Aurora X1 with an expression that was not curiosity. It was recognition. She registered it and moved on. Diana had noticed her pause. Logan found Caleb 7 minutes later in Bay 9 and told him clearly. The car in the front bay was not his concern, was not to be approached, and any inclination Caleb had toward it should be redirected toward the brake drum job in Bay 11 that had been waiting since yesterday. He said it without aggression but without ambiguity, the manner of a man redrawing a boundary he expects to be respected. Caleb said he understood, and Logan went back to the front. As Caleb walked to Bay 11, he passed within a clean line of sight to the Aurora X1 sitting under the overhead lights. His stride slowed by exactly one step, then continued. Logan and Adrian spent the balance of that day and all of the following morning on the Aurora X1. And by early afternoon it was clear to both of them that they were in serious trouble, though neither said so plainly. The most advanced diagnostic scanner in the shop, a dealer-grade unit Logan had purchased 3 years ago on a commercial account and considered the cornerstone of the shop's high-end capability, could not establish communication with the vehicle's primary control network. The Aurora X1 had no standard OBD2 access port in the conventional position. It had no visible secondary diagnostic node. Its entire architecture sat outside every regulatory compliance framework that either of them had encountered, because it had been engineered outside those frameworks entirely. A commission vehicle built to a private client's specification, not to a market's requirements. Logan called 2 contacts at high-end import operations in the city. Neither had heard of the Aurora X1. One asked him to spell it. At midday, Logan called an independent technical consultant he had used twice before, a man named Jason Briggs with a reputation for obscure European makes. Briggs asked a measured series of questions, went quiet for a long moment, and then said he did not have documentation for this one and suggested contacting the manufacturer directly. Logan thanked him and ended the call. Adrian, who had been listening from the other side of the desk, said quietly that if they couldn't fix it, they needed to say so. Logan looked at the phone without answering. Then he walked to the front bay, stood looking at the Aurora X1 for 20 seconds, and returned to the office. He told Adrian they needed to look harder. Giselle called at 2:50. Logan told her they were narrowing the source of the problem. She said she would arrive at 3 as planned. He confirmed that and put the phone down, and the specific quality of his silence after that was the kind that signals a man has crossed from confidence into calculation. By 4, after Giselle had come and gone with a status report so vague it had technically constituted information while conveying almost none, Logan dismissed the junior mechanics early and stayed with Adrian in the empty shop until after 6. They had nothing. The car sat in the front bay like an unanswered question. Logan locked up and drove home. Adrian left 10 minutes later. The overhead lights went to standby mode. The shop was dark and still. Caleb let himself in with the secondary key at 11:43 that night. He stood for a moment in the dark entry, listening to the cooling tick of the overhead strips and the distant sound of traffic from the main road 2 blocks over. He walked to the front bay and stopped in front of the Aurora X1. He stood there for a long moment. Then he placed one hand on the carbon fiber of the front quarter panel. Slowly, the way a person touches something that was theirs in a way that has nothing to do with legal possession. He went to his locker, worked the combination, and took out the navy canvas notebook. He opened it to a section from 3.5 years prior. Pages dense with close-written notes in mixed English and French, annotated with hand-drawn circuit schematics and firmware timing diagrams, the documented thinking of someone working through a problem that had not yet fully resolved itself. He found the page he needed, the original field notes on the DEPM conflict interrupt, with the corrective firmware logic written in full in the margin of the facing page, bracketed twice in red ink. He read it once. He remembered writing it. He remembered the specific quality of the light in the Geneva workshop at that hour, the coffee going cold on the corner of the desk, the certainty that the problem was real and consequential, and that it would eventually matter to someone. From his bag he removed a device that would have looked, to anyone not familiar with development phase firmware engineering, like a custom circuit board in a utilitarian plastic housing, compact, connected to a short cable with a proprietary connector at one end. He had built it during his second year at Atelier Celestine to access the DEPM debug interface during firmware iteration testing. The debug port on the Aurora X1 was located inside the lower access panel of the central control cluster, not on the exterior of the vehicle, not accessible from the engine bay or the wheel well, not referenced in any service documentation that had ever left the building. It was a development phase access point, intended for the engineering team and no one else. The release mechanism for the panel required simultaneous pressure at 2 points 14 centimeters apart, a deliberate anti-access design. Logan and Adrian had looked at that panel 6 times and seen a smooth interior surface. They had not known what they were looking at. Caleb applied pressure at both points, felt the panel release, and connected his device. The screen populated within seconds. The fault log scrolled through 3 entries, two of them from the previous failed diagnostic attempts at other service facilities, each flagged with a security escalation mark. The third was the original fault, timestamped to 11 days prior, logged in complete detail, DEPM version 2.1, conflict interrupt triggered, traction control override engaged at 204 kilometers per hour in an ambient temperature of 34 degrees Celsius. Hybrid drive failsafe engaged, zero OBD output routed to accessible diagnostic channels, no error propagated to standard systems. The car had gone silent exactly as he had described in a report that had been filed and forgotten. Caleb read the fault entry once. Then he turned back to the notebook and read his own words from 3.5 years ago, written on an evening in Geneva when no one had considered the failure scenario probable enough to correct. He took a pen from his jacket pocket, opened to a clean page, and wrote the firmware patch from memory, cross-referencing the margin notes twice, adjusting 2 threshold values to align with the operating parameters logged in the current fault record. 47 lines, completed in 22 minutes. He uploaded the patch through the debug interface, initiated a system verification, and waited. The Aurora X1's instrument cluster lit briefly, the soft activation cycle of a system coming back online after a corrective write, and then settled into its ready state. The hybrid drive module registered nominal. The DEPM confirmed the conflict interrupt resolved. The security protocol, recognizing a successful authenticated interaction, cleared the escalation flag from the previous failed attempts. At 1:57 in the morning, the Aurora X1 started. The sound was not dramatic, a low layered vibration refined nearly to silence, the particular acoustic signature of a machine operating at the precise specification for which it was designed. Caleb sat on a shop stool beside the car for a while without moving. Then he opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote the full technical report: fault identification, root cause, corrective action, and a recommendation for periodic firmware review. He signed it with the initials he had always used on internal Atelier Celestine documentation. Before closing the debug interface, he added a single comment line at the end of the firmware log, a habit from the Geneva years, where engineering notes freely mixed languages. Réparé comme prévu, CM. He placed the written report on the central work desk, returned his equipment to his bag, locked the front bay behind him, and walked out into the street. Logan arrived before 7 the following morning, earlier than usual, driven back to the shop by the particular restlessness of a problem left unresolved. He entered through the office, walked to the front bay, and put his hand on the hood of the Aurora X1. He felt residual warmth that did not belong to a car that had sat through a cold night undisturbed, and he stood still for a moment. He found the report on the work desk. He read it once, then again more slowly. He understood approximately 60% of the technical content, enough to recognize that it was precise, structurally sound, and written by someone with intimate knowledge of this vehicle's engineering. He checked the security camera footage from the overnight hours. The camera angle was oblique, the figure in the footage identifiable only as a male of medium build who had worked near the car for just over 2 hours. Logan looked at the image for a while. Then he made his decision. He opened a blank service document and copied the report's content word by word, inserting his own name and Adrian's as the servicing technicians. He transferred the fault description, the root cause analysis, the corrective action, everything, in the same sequence and language, because he could not improve on the structure and saw no reason to alter what was already coherent. There was a single element he did not recognize, a comment line at the end of the firmware log written in French, followed by initials. He deleted it. It was anomalous, and he preferred clean documentation. He printed the rewritten report, placed it on the desk, and shredded the original. When Adrian arrived 20 minutes later, Logan told him in 3 sentences what had happened and what they were going to do. Adrian looked at the Aurora X1 for a moment, said nothing, and walked to his station. When Caleb arrived at 7:35, Logan met him at the door and said, quietly and directly, that entering the shop after hours without authorization was grounds for immediate termination, and that if Caleb said anything to anyone about the previous night, the outcome of their employment relationship would be simple and immediate. Caleb listened to all of it. He looked at Logan afterward with an expression that contained no particular emotion. No anger, no fear, no appeal. He said he understood. He walked to his station. Logan read it as the end of the matter. Diana Walsh arrived at 11 for a preliminary inspection before Giselle's afternoon visit. She was polite, methodical, and quiet in the way that is sometimes more thorough than noise. She asked Logan 3 questions about the diagnostic process, and Logan answered them competently in general terms but lost precision when she asked about the specific tool used to access the vehicle's control architecture. She wrote something on her tablet and did not comment. Before she left, she asked whether she could access the vehicle's internal event log through the infotainment interface. A routine courtesy check, she said. Logan told her the log was not relevant to the completed repair. Diana said she understood entirely, thanked him, and walked back to the Escalade. She took out her phone before the door closed. Giselle Hartwell arrived at Voss Automotive at 3:10 in the afternoon with Diana and without the security detail. A deliberate choice she had made that morning because the kind of conversation she was now expecting to have did not require that kind of presence. Logan met her at the entrance with the rewritten report, printed documentation, and the smooth professional confidence of a man presenting a finished product to a client. He was genuinely skilled at this part. It was perhaps the thing he did best. Giselle took the report and read it standing at the work desk, slowly and completely, the way a person reads something they are evaluating rather than confirming. When she reached the technical fault description, she paused. When she reached the corrective action section, she stopped. She looked up, "What tool did you use to access the DEPM debug interface?" Logan said they had used the shop's proprietary high-performance diagnostic system. The tool named the specific model. He said he would need to check the documentation. "Where is the debug port located on this vehicle?" A pause. "The central control cluster," Logan said. "Specifically where in the cluster?" Adrian, standing near the lift behind Logan, did not move. "The lower access panel," Logan said. "What is the release mechanism for that panel?" The compressor cycling in the back was the only sound. Logan said they had a proprietary release interface. Giselle set the report on the desk between them. Her voice did not change in volume or tempo when she spoke. "The debug port on the Aurora X1 is not referenced in any service documentation available outside Atelier Celestine in Geneva. The release mechanism for the lower access panel was an internal anti-access design that was never disclosed in any external document. The DEPM firmware architecture was proprietary development that was never shared with any third party. There are, to my knowledge, 3 people outside my immediate family who understand this vehicle well enough to have written what is in this report." She paused for exactly the time it took the sentence to land. "So I would like to know who actually fixed my car." Logan began a sentence. Giselle did not let him finish it. Diana placed her tablet on the desk face up. The screen showed the Aurora X1's internal system event log, pulled automatically from the vehicle's cloud backup during her preliminary visit that morning, a security feature of the car's architecture that preserved system activity to a private server on any network contact, regardless of what happened to printed documents afterward. The log showed 2 entries, the original fault from 11 days prior, and then, timestamped at 1:57 in the morning, a successful DEPM firmware correction. The correction entry had a trailing comment line at the end of its log string, a line Logan had deleted from the printed report, but that the system had preserved in its own permanent record, because system logs do not respond to paper shredders. "Repare comme prévu." Giselle read those 5 characters and went still for 3 seconds. She had seen that signature notation before, in the original Atelier Celestine project files her father had shared with her at the time of the vehicle's delivery, in the engineering documentation that listed the lead designer of every system in the Aurora X1, C.M. Caleb Merritt. The engineer who had disappeared from Geneva without explanation 4 years ago, whose name appeared on 26 internal documents in the car's build record, whose firmware was running in the vehicle she had been driving for the better part of 3 years. She looked toward the back of the shop. "Is Caleb Merritt here?" Logan said Caleb was a shop mechanic without authorization for this class of vehicle, that he had acted without sanction, and there were liability considerations that Giselle had already moved past him. She found Caleb in Bay 11, working under a sedan on the lift, a socket wrench in his hand and grease to the forearm. He lowered himself from under the car and stood. He was somewhat worn compared to the photographs in the Geneva files, worn in the way that a period of significant loss leaves a person, not diminished, but marked, but the stillness was the same, the particular quality of someone who has stopped needing to fill silence with anything other than what belongs there. Giselle spoke to him in French, whether he was the one who had designed this vehicle. Caleb answered in French without hesitation that he had designed part of it, and that he had always known about the fault. She studied him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating a prior estimate. Then she walked back to the front of the shop, took out her phone, and opened a video call to a contact she had stored. The call connected to Raymond Aubert, technical director of Atelier Celestine, standing in a bright workshop space in Geneva, in a white coat with a pencil behind his ear. He looked at the camera, registered the face visible behind Giselle's shoulder, and said without preamble, without formality, in the voice of a man who has been carrying something for a long time, "Caleb, you remembered the bug. I have been carrying the guilt of that filing decision for 3 years." The call lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, Giselle turned to face Logan. She did not raise her voice because she did not need to. "Your shop will receive a full review of this service engagement. My legal team will contact you regarding the documentation discrepancy." She said it with the finality of a sentence that is already complete and does not require an addendum. Mayor Joseph Hartwell arrived 4 minutes after that. Diana had sent a brief message during the video call because she had understood 15 minutes earlier where the afternoon was going. He walked in through the front entrance, read the room in a single pass. The report on the desk, Logan against the wall, Adrian motionless, the Aurora X1 in the bay, and then his gaze settled on the man in the mechanic's jacket standing at the edge of the work floor. Hartwell recognized the name his daughter had said. He had read it dozens of times in the engineering documentation of the most remarkable vehicle he had ever owned. He crossed the floor and extended his hand to Caleb. "I have been wanting to find you for 4 years," he said simply. "I just did not know where to look." The formal consequences for Logan Voss took shape over the following week. Hartwell Group's legal counsel submitted a formal complaint regarding falsified service documentation to the state's Automotive Service Licensing Board. The commercial fleet maintenance contract Logan had signed with the city the previous month, a 3-year agreement that would have been the largest single account in Voss Automotive's history, was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. 2 of Logan's major commercial clients received informational calls from Diana Walsh that were described afterward as measured in tone and decisive in their effect. Adrian Cole disputed nothing. He had not spoken more than a handful of words since the moment Giselle placed her tablet on the desk. Giselle did not pursue the matter further than the necessary professional and legal channels required. She was not, by temperament, interested in punishment as an endpoint. She was interested in accuracy, and accuracy had been restored. She had also spent 3 hours in the days following going through the Aurora X1's original build documentation with an attention she had not previously applied, and she now understood the full record of what had been built for her. The systems, the decisions, the trade-offs, the report that had been filed and forgotten, and the person who had written it. Atelier Celestine's offer reached Caleb by email 3 days after the confrontation at the shop, from Raymond Aubert directly. Senior consulting engineer, remote contract, no Geneva residency required, structured around Caleb's availability and judgment rather than a fixed schedule. The compensation was the kind of figure that was requiring justification. Caleb read the email twice, closed his laptop, and drove to pick up Bonnie from school. 2 days after that, Giselle's proposal arrived through Diana, not a job offer but a partnership. She was in the early stages of establishing a private performance vehicle service facility in the city, a purpose-built operation for clients who owned the category of vehicle that no commercial shop was equipped to service. She had spent 6 months identifying someone with the technical depth to run it and had not found a person she trusted. The letter was precise and 1 page long. At the bottom, in her own handwriting, "I am not buying your reputation. I am investing in your capability. There is a difference." Caleb accepted both. He signed the Atelier Celestine consulting agreement on a Thursday and spent the following week looking at a building 2 miles from his apartment, a former machine shop on a corner lot with good ceiling clearance and infrastructure that could be worked with. He put his name on the lease on a Friday afternoon and ordered a sign the same day. Steel-cut letters mounted flush against the brick, no ornamentation. Caleb Merritt Automotive. He was working late on the first Saturday in the new space, measuring bay dimensions and planning equipment placement, the Navy notebook open on the workbench beside him, when Bonnie arrived with the neighbor who had been watching her. She was carrying a paper bag with sandwiches and the stuffed bear that had belonged to her mother tucked under her arm. She walked through the empty shop with the methodical interest of a 7-year-old conducting a serious inspection, testing the echo of her footsteps in the high space, examining the workbench, pressing her hand against the cold concrete of the far wall, and then returned to stand beside her father. She pointed at the sign visible through the front window, the letters catching the last of the evening light. Caleb put his hand on her shoulder and they stood there for a moment without speaking. Giselle arrived 20 minutes later, alone, no escalade, no advance message, just the sound of a car in the lot, and then her figure at the open door. She looked at the sign for a moment. She looked at the empty space with its marked floor and its good bones and the notebook open on the workbench. She looked at Caleb across the room. "It looks like a start," she said. "That's what it is," he said. She did not stay long. There was nothing theatrical in the moment, no audience, no statement being made for anyone's benefit. She turned and walked back to her car. Caleb watched her go, then turned back to the workbench, picked up the notebook and opened it to a clean page. He found a pen. He wrote the date at the top. Below it, 2 words, "First day." He looked at those words for a moment, then looked up at the space around him, the high ceiling, the clean bays, the light through the front window throwing the letters of the sign in reverse across the concrete floor. He had spent 4 years making himself smaller than he was, and he was finished with that now. He left the rest of the page blank. There was time now to fill it.